He was about to walk right past. He always walked past. The man with the $2,000 overcoat and a billion-dollar meeting in 20 minutes had no time for the world's problems. But there, under Seattle's fine rain, was a little girl whose curved shoulders and stubbornly untied shoelaces stopped him as if an invisible wall had risen in his path. Before we dive into this exciting story, leave a comment below saying where you're watching from. Your presence means a lot to us. Enjoy this journey of faith and hope. The rain fell softly over Seattle that October morning, transforming the streets into liquid mirrors that reflected the gray sky. Autumn had arrived early this year, bringing with it that particular melancholy of the Pacific Northwest, where fog mixed with sea breeze and created a curtain of unresolved memories. Nathan Brooks stepped out of the black Tesla, phone glued to his ear, jaw tense as it always became when the world didn't move at the speed he demanded. "Tell the board to wait until I get back to San Francisco," he said, his voice cutting like the wind that sliced down Pike Street. "I don't care how much Zenith Corp offered. We don't sell Brooks technology to anyone who wears jeans to board meetings." He hung up without waiting for an answer, a habit he'd developed over 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, rung by relentless rung. His Italian shoes, custom-made in Milan, of course, marked the hurried rhythm on the wet Pine Street sidewalk. The impeccable gunmetal gray overcoat over the athletic body he maintained with 5 a.m. gym sessions and a diet that his personal chef supervised with military precision. Some heads turned when he passed. They always turned. He seemed to belong in Manhattan, not Seattle. He had that magnetic presence that made people look twice, uncertain if they'd seen him in Forbes or a CNBC interview. Nathan Brooks, 48 years old, self-made billionaire, tech innovator, sought-after speaker at Davos and Silicon Valley, constant presence in the Wall Street Journal. To the world, he was the man who had everything. The $3 billion company, the penthouse apartment in San Francisco overlooking the bay, the private jet, the art collection that would make MoMA blush with envy. But as he walked under Seattle's dripping sycamores, their branches heavy with October rain, there was a weight on his shoulders that all the success in the world couldn't straighten. His face, perfect on paper, defined jawline, piercing blue eyes, graying hair just enough to look distinguished, carried a weariness that didn't come from time, but from distance. Distance from the man he used to be before trading his soul for stock options and PowerPoint presentations. He didn't come to Seattle often, maybe twice a year, and always on business. Too many ghosts walked these streets, too many memories he'd chosen to lock in a mental box labeled "Do Not Open." Sarah. The name surfaced uninvited, as it always did when it rained like this. Sarah, with her honey-colored hair and eyes that saw through all his defenses. Sarah who read Virginia Woolf aloud while he tried to work. Sarah who left without saying goodbye. As he approached Pioneer Square, the sound of laughter caught his attention, cutting through his reflections like a knife through silk. It wasn't the cheerful, innocent laughter of children playing. It was sharp, mocking, the kind of laughter that leaves invisible scars. It came from the edge of a small playground near an elementary school across the street. Cascade Elementary, he noted from the weathered sign. A group of children was walking away, maybe 4 or 5 of them, all with expensive backpacks and attitudes that already promised futures of casual privilege. They were laughing, whispering, nudging each other as they passed by a little girl sitting alone on the curb. She had her back to them, shoulders curved in a posture Nathan recognized immediately, the posture of someone trying to become invisible. Her sneakers, hot pink and clearly too big for her small feet, were untied. The shoelace ends dragged in the puddle beside her. Her little hands, he could see even from that distance how small they were, struggled with the laces, fingers moving quickly and desperately, but the loops kept coming undone like broken promises. Nathan slowed his pace. He didn't intend to stop. Nathan Brooks wasn't a man who stopped, not for street artists playing out-of-tune guitars, not for panhandlers with cardboard signs, not for children with problems that weren't his. He had a meeting in 20 minutes with Japanese investors. He had memos to review. He had an empire to run. But something about her shoulders, the way they trembled almost imperceptibly, like wounded bird wings, kept his feet glued to the sidewalk as if the asphalt itself had become quicksand. He watched as she tried again. Pull, twist, loop, fail. The cycle repeated 3 times before she paused, took a deep breath in a way that was too mature for someone so small, and tried once more. She wiped her face with her jacket sleeve, a faded purple jacket that had seen better days, and in that single movement, Nathan saw something that hit him like lightning. The attempt to be strong when no one is looking. The kind of strength that shouldn't be required of a child. It hit him harder than he expected, like a punch to the solar plexus. Suddenly, he was 8 years old again, sitting on the steps of his foster home, trying not to cry as other children walked by, laughing. Suddenly, he was that boy who learned too early that showing weakness was inviting more pain. His feet moved before his mind could protest. He crossed the street, dodging a cyclist who honked irritably. Her head didn't turn when he approached. She continued staring at her shoes, chin tucked into her chest, as if trying to disappear inside herself, become so small that the world would simply ignore her. He knew that trick. He'd been a master at it once. He crouched down slowly, careful not to startle her, his knees protesting against the movement. When had crouching become difficult? The smell of crayons and apple juice floated around her, mixed with something floral, children's shampoo perhaps. "Hi," he said softly, using the voice he reserved for, well, he wasn't sure who he reserved this voice for. He hadn't used it in years. The little girl flinched as if she'd been struck, her small shoulders contracting. Nathan raised his hand slightly, palm open in surrender. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." She turned to him slowly, cautious as a wounded animal. The eyes that met his were large, glassy with unshed tears, a shade of blue that seemed strangely, impossibly familiar, like looking into a temporal mirror. "Are you having trouble there?" he asked, gesturing to the rebellious shoelaces. She hesitated, studying his face as if searching for signs of danger, then nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He smiled just enough to soften his normally unreadable expression, the corporate mask he wore like armor. "May I try? I'm pretty good with knots. I took a course once." That was a lie. He'd learned to tie shoes at 12, much later than most children, because no one had cared enough to teach him. Another small nod, this time accompanied by the slightest suggestion of curiosity in her eyes. He extended his hand, his manicured fingers brushing the worn laces. They were stiff with dirt and use, stained in some places with what looked like mud or maybe paint. He worked slowly, not because he couldn't do it quickly. His hands knew 1,000 types of knots from sailing in Nantucket, but because something about this moment demanded care, the kind of deliberate attention he hadn't given to anything in a long time, maybe years. "The trick," he said while working, "is talking to them. Shoelaces are stubborn. They like to know you respect them." A small sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, but a distant cousin of one. When the loops were finally done, double knots because he remembered how it felt to have shoes that wouldn't stay tied, he tugged gently to test the knot. "There. That should hold at least until you get home." The little girl looked at her shoes as if he'd performed magic, then raised her eyes to his face. Her lower lip trembled just slightly, but she smiled, a small, cautious movement of her lips that completely undid him. It wasn't the smile itself, though it was adorable in the way only children's smiles could be. It was what lay behind it, the fragile hope that maybe the world wasn't completely cruel. The silent gratitude for being seen, the bittersweet pain of a moment of kindness on a difficult day. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the traffic noise. "What's your name?" he asked, still crouched to be at her eye level. "Emma. Emma." The name hit like a punch to the chest, stealing his breath, not for what it was, but for what it remembered. Emma had been the name Sarah had chosen. On a lazy afternoon years ago, lying on the couch of their first apartment. "If we have a girl," she had said, tracing circles on his chest. "We'll call her Emma. It's strong but gentle, like I want her to be." He cleared his throat, forcing the emotion down, back into the locked box where it belonged. "Emma, that's a beautiful name. It suits you." She blinked at him, her head tilted slightly. "What's yours?" "Nate," he said. He almost never used that version. It was Nathan for the business world, Mr. Brooks for most. But somehow Nathan Brooks seemed too heavy, too formal to give to this small creature with rebellious shoelaces and sad eyes. Emma looked at him again, her gaze intense and penetrating, as if trying to memorize his face, file it away in some mental category of adults who might be safe. "You talk different," she observed with the direct honesty of children. "Are you from somewhere else?" He laughed, a sound that surprised him with its genuineness. "I lived here a long time ago, but you're right, I spent so much time away that I probably seem from somewhere else now." "You don't look like you belong here," she said, not maliciously, just as a fact, like saying the sky was blue or rain was wet. "That's what everyone says," he agreed. She fidgeted with her jacket sleeve, pulling at a loose thread. "My grandma says some people forget where they came from, says they get lost trying to get somewhere they don't even know where it is." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Suddenly, Sarah's words echoed across the years. "You're so busy running toward the future that you forgot to live in the present." "She's probably right," he said quietly, more to himself than to Emma. A pause stretched between them, comfortable in a strange way. The school bell rang in the distance, a metallic sound that cut through the moment. Emma jumped up suddenly in a hurry. She adjusted her backpack straps, too big, like everything on her, covered with faded unicorn and rainbow stickers, and smiled again, wider this time. "Bye, Mr. Nate." He watched her walk toward a woman waiting near the corner. The woman was older, maybe 60-something, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun that had seen better days. She wore a faded yellow rain cape and green gardening boots. She seemed familiar in a way that made Nathan's neck tingle, but he couldn't place from where. Not yet. Emma turned once to wave, her small face lit with something that hadn't been there before. He raised his hand without thinking, waving back as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then she was gone, her pink sneakers, now properly tied, disappearing down the sidewalk into Seattle's morning fog. He stood there for a long time, long after it made sense, hands buried in the pockets of his $2,000 coat, heart beating an irregular melody for reasons he couldn't name. His phone vibrated insistently, the meeting with the Japanese, no doubt, but he ignored it. Emma. That name, that hesitant smile and those eyes, that impossible blue he'd seen before long ago in another face, in another life. He looked at the wet sidewalk, at the exact spot where she'd been sitting. A small puddle reflected the cloudy sky, and for a moment he saw himself reflected, not the Nathan Brooks of today, but the Nate of 20 years ago. Before hostile takeovers and IPOs, before trading love for ambition. For the first time in years, he felt his carefully constructed life tilt slightly off its perfect axis, like a crooked painting you suddenly can't stop noticing. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified and electrified him in equal measure, that something fundamental in him had changed forever. If this story touched your soul, leave your like to show us and share in the comments where you're watching from. You might discover you have a neighbor watching along with you right now. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to not miss more exciting stories like this one. Nathan didn't return to the Four Seasons immediately. The meeting with the Japanese would be rescheduled. Claire, his assistant, would handle that with her usual efficiency. Instead, he wandered through Seattle's streets as he hadn't done in 2 decades, letting his feet take him down paths his mind had tried to forget. He passed the old art galleries of Pioneer Square with hand-painted signs announcing exhibitions by local artists who probably barely paid rent. He passed cafes with open windows where live jazz spilled onto the street like spilled honey, sweet and sticky with nostalgia. Seattle smelled different from San Francisco. Here it was, roasted coffee and wet pine, salt water from the Sound, and something else indefinable. Something older, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It smelled of lost possibility. "Emma?" He said the name aloud softly as he passed Pike Place Market, vendors shouting about fresh fish and flowers. The name curled on his tongue, familiar and strange at the same time. The sound nestled in his chest like a bird seeking shelter and stayed there, beating soft wings against his ribs. He hadn't thought about Sarah Mitchell in a decade, not seriously, not really. Not the way a man remembers someone who once carried his heart like Venetian crystal, fragile, precious, unique. He had buried the memory of her under layers of success, IPOs that made headlines, award galas where he smiled for cameras, glass-walled conference rooms on the 50th floor of San Francisco where he could see the whole world, except what mattered. Sarah was safe there, distant, buried under spreadsheets and quarterly projections, until that name coming from a child's lips. Until those impossible blue eyes that were so much like other eyes he'd loved and lost. He turned onto Madison Street without thinking, muscle memory guiding his steps, and found himself in front of Emerald Books, a narrow brick store squeezed between a laundromat and a Thai restaurant. The sign was more faded now, paint peeling at the edges, but still unmistakably the same place. How many Thursday afternoons had he spent here, pretending to read business biographies while actually watching Sarah in the poetry section? She was always there, 3 to 5, like clockwork. She'd sit cross-legged on the floor despite available chairs, lost in Sylvia Plath or Maya Angelou or Mary Oliver, with that distant look in her eyes that suggested she was living 1,000 lives through the words on the pages. She used to say, running her fingers along book spines like they were old friends, "A book is a promise, Nate. Either you break it or it breaks you. There's no middle ground." He never understood what she meant, not until now. His hand was on the doorknob before he realized he'd decided to enter. The bell above the door chimed, the same sound from 20 years ago, and suddenly he was 28 again, nervous and eager and completely in love with a woman who read poetry like other people breathed. "Can I help you?" came a voice from behind the counter. Nathan turned, snapping back to the present with a start. The clerk was a woman in her 60s. No, 70s now, he realized with a shock, with short silver hair cut in an elegant pixie and warm eyes behind reading glasses hanging on a beaded chain. She was reorganizing a stack of handmade bookmarks, but paused when she saw him. Her eyes narrowed, then widened with recognition. "Wait a minute. Nate Brooks? Nathan Brooks?" He forced a smile, the social one he'd perfected at 1,000 cocktail parties. "Hello, Dorothy. You have a better memory than I do." She came around the counter with surprising speed and pulled him into a brief but firm hug that smelled of old paper and lavender tea. "Still with that big city stiffness, I see. Some habits never change." "Still with that brutal honesty," he replied, relaxing despite himself. Dorothy always had this effect on people, made you feel simultaneously criticized and loved. She stepped back, arms crossed, studying him like an interesting specimen. "Well, haven't seen you in what, 15 years? "Closer to 20, he admitted, the words heavy with everything that had happened in those 2 decades. "Good Lord, time flies when you're getting old and bitter." She tilted her head. "What brings you back to our humble bookstore? Don't tell me you finally decided to read something besides financial reports." He hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. "Business," he said finally. "Sort of." Her look softened, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening with understanding. "You came by here more than once, when you were with Sarah. Always pretended to browse the business section while she got lost in poetry." The sound of her name like a bell being rung, reverberating through him. Sarah, in her territory where she'd been most herself. "I heard she passed," he said, his voice just above a whisper, the words scraping his throat. Dorothy nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Cancer? 5 years ago this fall? It was quick at the end, thank God. She didn't suffer much." Nathan closed his eyes, the world swaying slightly. "I didn't know. I should have. I didn't know." "There was no reason for you to know," Dorothy said gently, touching his arm. You'd been gone a long time. She understood that. He nodded, swallowing the tightness in his throat, the bitter taste of regret on his tongue. Did she stay in Seattle all that time? Most of it. Went away for a year or two after you two, well, after. But she came back, said Seattle was where her roots were, even if it hurt sometimes. After a moment of heavy silence, Dorothy tilted her head, studying him with those perceptive eyes. Are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost. I met a little girl today, he said, the words coming in a rush. At the park, near Cascade Elementary. Emma. Her name was Emma Mitchell. Dorothy's eyes flickered with something, surprise perhaps, or maybe recognition. I tied her shoelaces, he continued, needing to say it aloud, make it real. She didn't say much, but her smile and her eyes, my God, her eyes, look like Sarah's. Dorothy finished for him, her voice soft. He nodded, unable to speak. She'd be about 6 now, Dorothy said, moving to straighten a nearby shelf, giving him a moment to compose himself. Living with her grandmother in Queen Anne since Sarah passed. Margaret Mitchell, you remember her? Nathan's breath caught. Margaret, Sarah's mother. The woman who had looked at him at Sarah's father's funeral all those years ago as if she could see right through him. So she is Sarah's daughter. It wasn't a question. She is. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands tingling with numbness. And the father? Dorothy stopped arranging books, turning to face him completely. Sarah never said much, just that he'd gone away long ago, chose something else instead of her. She paused, her eyes penetrating. Chose ambition over love. The words fell between them like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread and spread. Nathan looked at his hands, hands that signed million-dollar deals, that shook hands with CEOs and senators, hands that had once held Sarah while she cried over dreams they'd never realized together. Dorothy reached out and touched his arm again, more firmly this time. I don't judge, Nate. Never judged. Life takes people in strange directions. Sometimes we get lost trying to find ourselves. He nodded, his voice rough as gravel. She shouldn't have to carry this, Emma. She shouldn't be alone. She's not alone. She has Margaret and she has this community, but... Dorothy hesitated, then continued. That little girl has had a lot to carry for someone so small. Losing her mother so young leaves marks. Nathan moved to the window, looking out at the street where rain had begun again, soft and persistent. I met her 2 hours ago, and already I feel like I should do something, but I have no right, no claim. Maybe not, Dorothy said, joining him at the window, but sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. The question is, are you brave enough to take it? Outside, the sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting weak golden light over the wet streets. Street lamps were still on, confused by the day's darkness. He walked back out into the fresh air, the world somehow quieter despite the constant traffic. His legs felt like water. Emma was Sarah's daughter, which meant he stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, doing the math he'd avoided in the bookstore. Sarah had disappeared from his life just over 6 years ago. He remembered the date exactly, March 15th, the Ides of March, she'd said with that bitter smile. It had been the final fight in a series of fights. He'd gotten another promotion, another one that would require more travel, more time away. She'd begged him to slow down for them to start the family they'd planned when they were young and stupid and in love. There will always be another deal, she'd said, tears streaming down her face, but there won't be another us. You're being dramatic, he'd replied, already packing for Tokyo. I'll be back in 2 weeks. No, you won't, she'd said with terrible calm. Even when your body is here, you won't be. When he returned from Tokyo, 17 days later, with another deal closed and another bonus secured, she was gone. No note, no forwarding address, just absence where love used to be. He told himself she'd come back, that she'd call, that she'd miss him as much as he should have missed her. But instead, he dove deeper into work, let the wound heal over, let the memory of her become something he visited late at night when bourbon made it safe to feel. And now, Emma, a child with Sarah's eyes and her absence. A child who could be... His stomach turned violently. He leaned against the nearest brick wall, reality hitting him like a freight train. The timing was right, more than right. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called Claire. "Mr. Brooks, the Japanese investors." "Forget it," he cut her off. "Claire, I need everything you can find on Sarah Mitchell from Seattle. Everything. Medical records, address, employment history, and if possible..." He paused, the words difficult to form. "Custody records, birth records." There was a long pause. Claire had worked for him for 10 years. She knew all his moods, all his habits. This was new. "May I ask why?" she said finally, carefully. "I need to know," he said, his voice low and rough. "And Claire, do it quietly, very quietly." "Of course, Mr. Brooks. You'll have everything by morning." He hung up, the screen going dark, reflecting his face back to him. He didn't recognize the man looking back, wide-eyed, haunted, afraid. He wasn't sure what scared him more, what he already suspected, or what was yet to be discovered. Later that night, he sat in the ridiculously expensive hotel room, 25-year-old Macallan bourbon, untouched in a Waterford crystal glass beside him, looking out the panoramic window at Puget Sound. Ferries passed silently like ghosts over the water, their lights blinking Morse code messages he couldn't decipher. The city pulsed slowly below him, like an old heart that refused to stop beating despite everything it had endured. The room was flawless. Italian marble, Egyptian cotton sheets, original art on the walls. Everything perfect, everything empty. Like his life, he realized with sudden clarity. A beautiful mausoleum for a man who had forgotten how to live. He remembered the first time he told Sarah he loved her. It hadn't been planned, hadn't been grand. They were lying on a worn blanket in Discovery Park, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. She had a daisy stolen from someone's garden behind her ear, and he was trying to explain stock options to a woman who preferred to talk about Greek tragedies and Rumi's poetry. "You're impossible," he'd said, frustrated and enchanted in equal measure. "I love you even though you're terrible with metaphors," she'd replied, her eyes sparkling with amusement. He'd laughed, surprised. "You love me? Well, now I do. Now that you've admitted I'm impossible." He'd kissed her then, there on the blanket with the city sprawling before them like a promise, and believed, truly believed, with the certainty of the young and foolish, that they had forever. That love would be enough. That ambition and love could coexist without one devouring the other. But ambition is a loud and hungry thing. It drowns out whispers of contentment. It turns love into something negotiable, something that can be postponed until next quarter, next year, next milestone. He'd left Seattle a rising star, with promises to return, to slow down, to start that family they'd sketched on restaurant napkins late at night. And Sarah stayed behind, carrying something he never knew existed, carrying Emma, a daughter, possibly his daughter. He closed his eyes, the silence of the room stretching around him like a suffocating blanket. The air conditioning whispered secrets he didn't want to hear. Then softly, so low it barely disturbed the air, he whispered, "What did I do, Sarah? What did we do?" There was no answer, of course. Just the distant sound of the sound lapping against the piers, the muffled hum of jazz from some nearby club floating through the window, and the image burned into his retinas of a little girl's face. Sarah's impossible eyes, the deafening silence of her absence, all tied together with worn pink shoelaces that he'd tied with hands that trembled with recognition he didn't yet dare name. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows like an accusation, casting harsh shadows across the suite that cost more per night than most people made in a month. His breakfast, prepared by the hotel chef at exactly 6:30 a.m. as he'd specified, was growing cold on the table. Steel-cut oats with fresh figs and local honey, sourdough toast with French butter, Ethiopian coffee ground fresh, perfectly presented on porcelain that cost more than some people's shoes. Completely forgotten, untouched, irrelevant. His eyes were fixed on a single photograph, and his hands shook slightly holding it. Claire had delivered everything at dawn, appearing with the silent efficiency of someone who understood that some missions transcended normal business. She hadn't asked how she'd gotten the records so quickly. Claire had connections he preferred not to question. But this time, her professional silence came tempered with something more. Unspoken concern floated between them when she handed over the manila folder and left without her usual morning consultation about the day's agenda. He'd opened the folder as if it might explode, as if it contained secrets that would rewrite his history. And it did. Inside, Sarah's sparse employment history: substitute teacher, assistant librarian, finally manager of a small art gallery in Fremont, a thin medical file that made his heart ache, cancer diagnosis 3 years ago, aggressive treatment, then palliative care, Emma's birth certificate with her careful cursive handwriting, and the photograph. It was a hospital photo, slightly blurred at the edges as if taken by a hurried nurse. Sarah, in a light blue hospital gown, her honey-colored hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, pale skin, but radiant with something fierce and protective. In her arms, a small bundle of pink and white blanket, a tuft of golden hair just visible, a tiny fist escaping the fabric. The name was printed below in careful block letters: Emma Rose Mitchell. Date of birth, December 18th, 2017. Mother, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Father, not listed. Nathan swallowed hard, the paper trembling in his hands like a leaf in the wind. The date screamed at him. December 2017, 9 months after March. 9 months after Sarah left. She never told me. The words came out strangled, directed at the empty room. Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? But he knew the answer, didn't he? She'd tried. All those missed calls in the first months after she left. The Seattle numbers he'd let go to voicemail because he was in meetings, always in meetings. The emails he'd deleted without reading because it hurt too much to see her name in his inbox. He leaned back in the leather chair that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary as a teacher, letting the truth settle over him like ash. He let his eyes close, just long enough to summon memories he'd locked away. The sound of Sarah's laughter when he spun her around the kitchen to Etta James. The way she doodled flowers in the margins of her notebooks during long phone calls. The way she hummed Fleetwood Mac when she cooked barefoot in his kitchen, flour on her nose, red wine staining her lips purple. The way she'd looked that last morning, standing in the doorway with a suitcase in hand, waiting, praying, he realized now, for him to ask her to stay. He hadn't asked. He opened his eyes again, focusing on the single line in the file that destroyed him more completely than any failed deal could. Emergency contact. Margaret Mitchell, maternal grandmother. Phone, a local Seattle number. That was it. That was all that remained of their family on paper. No father to drive to school, no father to teach bicycle riding, no father to chase away monsters at night, just an elderly grandmother and the ghost of a mother who died too young. He stood abruptly, the chair rolling backward, grabbed his coat without thinking to change from his suit. He left the room without looking back, leaving the $300 breakfast to grow cold in its perfect abandonment. The elevator going down seemed to take forever, each floor an accusation. The lobby was too bright, too full of normal people living normal lives with normal problems. He walked quickly, past reception with their practiced smiles, past the valet who offered a hesitant, "Mr. Brooks, your car?" and out into the gray, wet Seattle morning air. His steps took him without conscious thought, muscle memory from 20 years ago guiding him through streets that had changed and remained the same. Cafes with new names, but the same smell of over-roasted beans. Boutiques where record stores used to be. Glass and steel condominiums where cozy apartments once housed hungry artists and hopeful poets. And then he was there. Queen Anne, 847 Gala Street. Sarah's brownstone still stood, narrow and dignified in its age, like a grandmother who refused to bow to time's expectations. The white paint was more faded now, peeling at the edges like unfinished thoughts. Ivy had claimed more of the facade, climbing toward the second-floor windows as if trying to peek inside. The shutters hung slightly askew. He remembered how Sarah could never get them to hang straight, no matter how much she tried. "They have personality," she used to say. "Like me." He stood on the sidewalk across the street, hands buried deep in his pockets, just watching, breathing, remembering. A couple passed, walking a golden retriever. A woman pushed a stroller, talking on the phone about nap schedules. Normal life happened around him while he stood frozen in time. The front door opened. His heart stopped. Emma came out first, that same too-big backpack bouncing against her back. Today, she wore jeans with unicorn patches on the knees and a purple sweater that had seen better days. Her hair was in a loose braid that was already coming undone, golden strands escaping to frame her face. She was humming something, off-key and carefree, a melody he couldn't identify but that made his chest ache. She hopped down the 3 front steps in one jump, landing with both feet together on the sidewalk. A moment later, the older woman he'd seen yesterday followed her. Margaret Mitchell. Recognition hit him like cold water. Margaret. He hadn't seen her in 20 years. Not since that awkward dinner where he'd asked for her blessing to propose to Sarah. She'd given it, reluctantly, with eyes that said she knew he'd break her daughter's heart eventually. She was older now, of course, hair completely silver, where it had once been graying blonde, slightly stooped in the shoulders from carrying the weight of loss, first her husband, then her daughter. She wore a faded denim shirt and brown corduroy pants, comfortable and practical. Her hands, he noticed, trembled slightly as she searched for keys in her purse. "Grandma, can you fix my braid again?" Emma asked, turning suddenly. "It's all loose, and Miss Patterson said I need to look neat for the class picture." Margaret sighed with fond exasperation and crouched down with visible effort, her knees protesting. "Hold still then, little bean." Her hands worked with practiced efficiency, rebraiding the golden hair, while Emma chattered about a boy named Marcus, who apparently ate glue, but was very good at math. Margaret murmured appropriate responses, clearly accustomed to Emma's stream of consciousness. When she finished, she kissed the top of Emma's head. "There, pretty as a princess." "Princesses are boring," Emma declared. "I want to be pretty like a scientist, or a dragon." Margaret laughed, a sound that was achingly familiar. She laughed exactly like Sarah, then pretty like a dragon scientist. Nathan stood completely still, barely daring to breathe, the pain in his chest growing sharper with each second. He was watching a life he didn't know existed, a life he should have been part of, a life his choices had excluded him from. A horn honked, shrill in the morning air. The yellow school bus stopped, brakes hissing. Emma ran forward, then stopped, ran back and hugged Margaret's legs quickly. "I love you, Grandma. I love you too, Bean. Have a good day." Emma climbed aboard the bus, waving frantically through the window as she found her seat. Margaret stood on the sidewalk until the bus turned the corner, a solitary sentinel guarding something precious. When she turned toward the house, Nathan moved without thinking. "Margaret." She froze mid-step, turned slowly, as if expecting the voice to be a hallucination. When her eyes landed on him, they narrowed with recognition, then widened with something between shock and anger. Nathan, not Nate. Full Nathan, like an accusation. He nodded, hands still buried in his pockets, heart beating so hard he felt nauseous. "It's been a long time." She crossed her arms over her chest, a barrier between them. 20 years, 3 months, and 16 days if we're counting. And I think we are. The precision cut him. She had been counting, of course she had. He took a hesitant step forward. "Can we talk?" "About what?" Her voice was sharp as broken glass. "About how you broke my daughter's heart? About how she died calling your name at the end? Or about how that little girl grew up without a father because you chose spreadsheets over people?" Each word landed like a physical blow. He accepted them, knew he deserved them. "About Emma," he said quietly. "I met her yesterday. I didn't know." Something changed in Margaret's face. The anger didn't disappear, but it was tempered by something else. Weariness, perhaps, or pity. She studied him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, she opened the screen door. "Come in then, but leave your ego on the porch. I just cleaned the floors and don't need you tracking that through my house." The living room was a museum of a life lived. It smelled of lemon wax and old books, chamomile tea, and that particular fragrance of houses where children had grown up. The walls were covered with photographs. Sarah at various ages, Emma from baby onward, the two together in those precious 2 years they'd had. Nathan stood awkwardly near the window while Margaret disappeared into the kitchen. He studied the photos like evidence in a case he was trying to solve. Sarah holding newborn Emma, exhausted but radiant. Emma taking her first steps, Sarah crouched with arms open. Sarah reading to Emma, the two curled up on the couch he recognized from her old apartment. Sarah thinner, paler, still smiling as Emma blew out birthday candles, 3 of them. Margaret returned with 2 mugs of tea, steam rising between them like incense. She placed one on the coffee table in front of him with a decisive thunk and sat in the worn armchair, hands folded like a judge about to pass sentence. "Say what you came to say," she commanded. "I didn't know," he began, the words inadequate but necessary. "About Sarah being sick, about Emma. I swear I didn't know." "I figured that," Margaret replied, blowing on her tea. "You were never cruel, Nathan. Just blind, deaf, absent." He flinched. "I deserve that. You deserve worse. But I'm not here to punish you. I'm too old and too tired to waste energy on anger." She took a sip, studying him over the rim of the mug. "The question is, why are you here now?" He looked at his hands, noticing for the first time how strange they looked without a phone or laptop to occupy them. "Because I met her yesterday, Emma. I didn't know who she was at first, just a little girl with untied shoelaces. But when she told me her name, Emma Mitchell," he paused, swallowing, "I couldn't walk away. I couldn't stop thinking about her." Margaret watched him like a hawk watches a mouse. "And what do you want now? Absolution, forgiveness, a pat on the back for finally showing up?" "No," he said firmly. "I don't know yet what I want. Answers maybe, understanding, a chance to—" He hesitated, then forced the words out. "A chance to fix what I broke, if that's possible." She snorted, but it wasn't entirely dismissive. "Second chances don't come wrapped with pretty bows, Nathan. They come with consequences, with work, with the willingness to face everything you avoided." He nodded, picking up the mug, but not drinking, kneading the warmth against his palms. "I thought I was doing the right thing back then, building something important, creating financial security for our future." "You chose to leave," Margaret said bluntly. "Let's not rewrite history now. You chose your company over her repeatedly until she stopped asking you to choose differently." The words hung between them, naked and ugly truth. "Sarah never told me exactly what happened in that last fight," Margaret continued, her voice softening fractionally. "But she didn't need to. I saw it in her eyes when she showed up at my door at 2 in the morning, soaked from the rain, suitcase in hand. She was broken, Nathan. You broke her." Tears burned behind his eyes. He blinked furiously, refusing to let them fall. He had no right to tears. "But," Margaret added, setting down her mug, "she put herself back together, for Emma. She was tired, yes, but she was determined to raise that girl without bitterness, without poison. She wanted Emma to know only love." Nathan's voice wavered. "She should have told me about the pregnancy. I had a right to know." Margaret leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Rights? You want to talk about rights? She tried to tell you, called 17 times in the first 2 weeks after she found out. Did you answer any of them?" His silence was answer enough. "She wrote you emails, letters. She even went to your office in San Francisco." Margaret paused, letting that sink in. "Your secretary said you were too busy to see her, too busy for the woman you claimed to love." Nathan closed his eyes, the memory coming back like a slap. Claire mentioning that some woman had come to the office looking desperate. He'd told her to send her away, assuming it was some disgruntled former employee or persistent salesperson. "She wanted to tell you?" Margaret continued, more gently now. "But you made it pretty clear, didn't you, that your future had no room for her, for a family, for anything that would slow down your precious climb." He stood abruptly, unable to sit still. He moved to the fireplace, where more photos lined up. Emma on her first day of school, Emma dressed as an astronaut for Halloween, Emma and Sarah making cookies, flour everywhere. "She wrote letters to you," Margaret said after a pause, "even after she gave up trying to contact you. Kept them in a box upstairs, never sent a single one." He turned, stunned. "Why?" Margaret stood, moving to stand beside him. "She said she wanted to wait until she believed you would listen. Really listen. Not just wait your turn to talk about quarterly projections." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken regret. "I want to see them," Nathan said finally. "The letters." Margaret didn't respond immediately. She studied him as if doing complex calculations about his character. Then she turned toward the stairs. "Not yet," she said firmly. "You haven't earned that. Not in one visit. Not with one request." He nodded, understanding. "What do I need to do?" "Prove you can stay," she said simply. "Prove you're not the same man who chose a Hong Kong conference over being beside her when her father died. Prove you can put Emma first, not when it's convenient, but always." Can I get to know her properly, spend time with her?" Margaret considered. "Emma mentioned you this morning, said a nice man tied her shoes, that he had sad eyes but gentle hands." Nathan's chest tightened. "She said that. She's observant, like her mother." Margaret returned to her chair. "She likes to go to the library on Thursdays after school. I take her. Maybe you could meet us there, by chance." "Thursday," he repeated. "Library." "But Nathan," she fixed him with a look that could stop time, "this isn't your redemption arc. She's a child who has already lost too much. If you enter her life, you stay. No excuses, no urgent meetings, no more important calls. You stay or you leave now. Choose." Nathan met her eyes steadily. "I stay." Margaret nodded slowly. "We'll see." As he moved toward the door, she spoke again. "Sarah loved you, you know, until the end. Even when she learned to live without you, she never learned to stop loving you." The words followed him outside, into Seattle's gray air, where rain had begun again. He stood on the sidewalk where Emma had been hours before, letting the rain soak his expensive coat, wash away the carefully constructed lie of his life. Somewhere in this city, a little girl was sitting in a classroom, not knowing that the stranger who tied her shoes might be her father. Somewhere in this city, in a box in an attic, letters waited like unplanted seeds, and standing in the rain, Nathan Brooks, billionaire tech titan, master of the universe, finally understood what he'd lost. Not just Sarah, not just Emma, but himself. The man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. The question now was, could he still become that man, or was it too late for all of them? Thursday arrived dressed in fog and promise, the kind of Seattle afternoon where the world seemed to exist behind a gauze curtain. Nathan had been standing outside the Queen Anne Public Library for 20 minutes, pretending to read messages on his phone while actually watching the entrance. He'd cancelled 3 meetings to be here. Claire nearly had a heart attack when he said he'd be unavailable all afternoon. "But the Tokyo contract," she'd begun. "It can wait," he'd said, and her shocked silence was almost worth as much as the millions it might cost. At 3:47, he saw them. Margaret walking slowly, Emma bouncing beside her like a hyperactive sparrow, the backpack bouncing with each step. Emma wore striped leggings and a sweater, with a cat wearing glasses. Her hair was in 2 braids today, already coming undone. Nathan took a deep breath and entered the library a few minutes after them, trying to look casual. The interior smelled of old paper and possibility, that particular library smell that was the same everywhere and nowhere. He found them in the children's section. Emma was already sitting cross-legged on the floor, leafing through a picture book about dragons. Margaret was in a nearby chair, knitting something purple and shapeless. "Hello," he said softly. Emma looked up, her face lighting with recognition. "Mr. Nate, the shoelace man." Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses. "What a coincidence," she said dryly. "Imagine finding you here." "I love libraries," he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He had loved them once. "May I?" He gestured to the space on the floor near Emma. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Do you like dragons? Who doesn't? He settled awkwardly, his long legs too much for the position. What are you reading? It's about a dragon who loses her fire, Emma explained, showing him the cover. Everyone says she's not a real dragon anymore, but then she discovers she can make ice instead, and that's even better because no one else can. Sounds like she discovered that being different can be a superpower, Nathan said. Emma studied him with those impossible blue eyes. Are you different? I think I am, he admitted. I forgot how to be normal for a long time. Normal is boring, Emma declared with 6-year-old confidence. My mom said normal was just a setting on the washing machine. Nathan's chest tightened. Your mom sounds like she was smart. She was the smartest, Emma said simply. She knew all the words, even the big ones like, she frowned, concentrating, atmospheric and consequence. Impressive words, Nathan agreed. Emma scooted closer, and he caught the scent of crayons and strawberry shampoo. Did you know her? My mom. Nathan glanced at Margaret, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, he said carefully. A long time ago. We were friends. What kind of friends? Emma asked with children's relentless persistence. The kind who read books together, he said, which was true. She loved poetry. Emma nodded solemnly. There's a box of her poems in the attic. Grandma says I can read them when I'm older. She paused, then asked abruptly, Why did you go away? The question landed like a grenade. Margaret stopped knitting. Nathan met Emma's eyes directly. Because I was foolish. I thought other things were more important than staying. What things? Work. Money. Things that seemed important but weren't. Emma considered this. My teacher says people sometimes make bad choices when they're scared. Your teacher is right, Nathan said, his throat tight. I was scared. Of what? He thought about lying, about giving an easy answer, but those eyes deserved truth. Of not being good enough, of failing, of being loved and not knowing how to love back properly. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand, her little fingers warm and sticky. It's okay. Everyone gets scared sometimes, even dragons. Nathan had to blink several times. Margaret cleared her throat. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you choose some books to take home? 3, remember. Emma jumped up, mood shifting instantly. Will you help me choose? She asked Nathan. I'd love to. They wandered the shelves, Emma pulling books, considering covers, narrating the merits of each one. Nathan followed her, asking questions, offering opinions when requested. It was surreal and normal at the same time, like a dream he didn't want to wake from. This one, Emma declared finally, holding up a book about a girl who builds a time machine from cardboard boxes. And this one about the octopus who makes friends, and... She paused at the final choice, then picked up a thin chapter book. This one, Nathan looked at the title, The Garden of Second Chances. It's about people who plant flowers in places where bad things happened, Emma explained, to make them beautiful again. Sounds perfect, he said softly. At the checkout counter, while Emma proudly presented her library card, I have my own, Margaret approached Nathan. She's getting attached to you, she said quietly. Does that scare you? Terrifying, he admitted, but not as much as the idea of disappointing her. Margaret studied him. Sarah wrote about you, you know, in the journals she left, said you had a good heart buried under all that ambition, said she hoped someday you'd find it again. I'm trying, Nathan said. Try harder, Margaret replied. That girl doesn't need tries, she needs certainty. As they left the library, Emma between them holding each of their hands, Nathan felt something shift, not dramatically, not with fireworks. Just a gentle click, like a door opening that had been closed for a long time. Mr. Nate? Emma said as they reached the corner where their paths would diverge. Yes? Will you be here next week? He looked at Margaret, who remained inscrutable, then at Emma, hopeful and cautious at once. Yes, he said firmly. I'll be here. Emma smiled, that transformative smile that made the world seem brighter. Good. I can show you my school project. It's about families. She ran ahead before he could respond, chasing a pigeon down the sidewalk. Margaret touched his arm. Don't disappoint her, Nathan. She's had enough disappointment for a lifetime. I won't, he promised. But as he watched them walk away, Emma skipping and Margaret moving with the careful dignity of age, he wondered if he could keep that promise. If the man he'd been for 20 years could really change. If second chances were real or just stories we tell ourselves to feel better about our failures. His phone buzzed. Claire again, no doubt with some crisis that only he could resolve. He silenced it without looking. For the first time in 20 years, work could wait. The following weeks unfolded like pages in a book Nathan was just learning to read. Thursday library visits became Tuesday and Thursday, then Monday, Tuesday and Thursday. Then somehow he was picking Emma up from school on Fridays, while Margaret did physical therapy for her hip. Each moment revealed something new. Emma hated peanut butter but loved almonds. She slept with 3 stuffed animals positioned just so. She knew the name of every constellation visible from Seattle. Sometimes she woke up crying for her mother, and no amount of grandma hugs could fill that particular mother-shaped hole. Nathan learned all this not at once, but in pieces. Like Emma feeding ducks at Green Lake, throwing crumbs one at a time, patient and deliberate. It was on a November afternoon, rain beating against Margaret's windows, that everything changed again. Emma was doing math homework at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration. Nathan was helping. No, 7 + 5 can't be 23, Emma. Why not? Math has rules, stupid rules. Margaret was making soup, the smell of garlic and thyme filling the air. Nathan's phone buzzed for the 10th time in an hour. Finally, frustrated, he picked it up. "Sorry," he said to Margaret, "I need to..." She waved him on. "Go ahead." He stepped onto the porch. "Claire, what? Yamamoto Industries is pulling out. The Tokyo deal is dead. We need you in San Francisco now. The jet is waiting at SeaTac." Nathan's world tilted. The Tokyo deal was everything. 3 years of work, billions at stake. "Mr. Brooks, are you there?" He looked through the window. Emma had abandoned math and was showing Margaret a drawing. Even through the glass, he could see it was a house with 3 figures in front. One tall, one medium, one small. "Reschedule the meeting," he heard himself say. "Excuse me? Reschedule? I'll be in San Francisco Monday." "But sir, they're threatening to go to Zenith." "Then let them." He hung up, something wild and free breaking loose in his chest. When he came back inside, Emma held up the drawing. "Look, it's us." "Us?" he asked carefully. "You, me, and Grandma. See? You're tall, so I made you extra tall. And Grandma has purple hair because she's magic. And you?" "I'm me," she said as if it were obvious. "I'm in the middle because I'm the glue." "The glue?" "Yeah, that keeps everyone together." She went back to coloring, casual about having reorganized his universe with crayons. Margaret met his eyes over Emma's head. "The glue," she repeated softly. "Children understand more than we think." That night, after Emma went to bed, 3 stories, 2 glasses of water, 1 monster check in the closet, Margaret brought out a worn shoebox and placed it on the kitchen table. "Are you ready?" she asked. Nathan looked at the box as if it contained explosives, which, in a way, it did. "I don't know. No one ever is." She pushed it toward him. "But Emma is asking questions about her father, about why she doesn't have one. She deserves truth, even if it's difficult." With trembling hands, Nathan opened the box. Inside, dozens of envelopes, some sealed, others not, all addressed to him in Sarah's handwriting. Some stained with what looked like tears, others scrawled with anger, some written so carefully that each letter seemed like a prayer. He picked one at random, dated 2 years after she'd left. "Dear Nate, Emma said her first word today. Light. Not Mama, not Grandma. Light." She pointed at the lamp and said it with such certainty. "I cried for an hour afterward because you should have been here. You were always my light, even when you chose darkness, even when you chose everything but us." He couldn't continue. He folded the letter carefully, pressed it to his chest. "How much did she know?" he asked. "About me?" "Sarah told her that her father had to go away for work," Margaret said, "that he loved her but didn't know how to stay. It was as much truth as she could manage without poisoning the well." Nathan picked up another envelope, this one unsealed, dated just 6 months before Sarah died. Nate, you probably will never read this. You're probably in some meeting right now, conquering the world one acquisition at a time. But I need to write it anyway. I'm sick. Cancer, that word that always happens to other people. The doctors talk about months, maybe a year, and all I can think about is Emma. She's extraordinary, Nate. Smart like you, creative like me. She has your eyes, that impossible blue that made me fall in love with you in that bookstore so many years ago. She's stubborn and kind and funny and perfect, and she's going to grow up without either of us. If you're reading this, it means you somehow found your way back. So please, please be the man I know you can be. Not for me, for her. Love our daughter, Nate. Love her enough for both of us. Always yours, even when I wasn't. Sarah. The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. Nathan Brooks, who hadn't cried since he was 8 years old, sobbed at Margaret Mitchell's kitchen table while Seattle rain washed the world outside. Margaret handed him a cloth handkerchief, practical as always. The question now, she said gently, is what you're going to do with this second chance. Nathan wiped his eyes, took a deep breath. I want to adopt her, legally. I want to be her father in every way. Margaret was quiet for so long, he thought she might refuse. Then, it'll take time, paperwork, lawyers, background checks. I have resources. It's not about money, she cut him off. It's about proving to the court that you're what's best for her, that you've changed, that you'll stay. Then I'll prove it, he said simply. Margaret stood, moving stiffly. There's something else. Sarah left this. She went to a kitchen drawer, pulled out an envelope with his name in legal handwriting. Inside was a document, paternity declaration, filled out, but never filed. The father's line was blank, waiting. She prepared this a month before she died, Margaret said. Said if you came back, if you proved you could be the father Emma deserved, then... Nathan looked at the document, then at Margaret. Why are you giving me this now? Because... Margaret said, moving toward the stairs, Emma drew you as family today. Children know things, see truths that adults complicate. She paused at the door. Don't disappoint her, Nathan. I won't survive watching her heart break like Sarah's did. After she went upstairs, Nathan sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by letters from a ghost and a child's crayon drawings. Outside, Seattle slept under its blanket of rain. Upstairs, Emma dreamed of dragons and gardens and families made of broken people who chose to love each other anyway. He picked up his phone, dialed Claire. Mr. Brooks, about Tokyo. I'm moving to Seattle, he said, permanently. Start looking for buyers for the San Francisco apartment. Silence. Then, sir, this is... Are you sure? He looked at Emma's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. 3 months later, on a clear February morning that made Seattle look washed and new, Nathan stood in a courtroom, wearing the only suit he had in Seattle, holding Emma's hand. Are you nervous? She whispered, swinging her legs in the too-high chair. Terrified, he whispered back. It's okay. I told the judge I choose you. And she had. In private interview, with the seriousness of someone much older than 7, Emma had told the judge, he's my dad. Maybe he wasn't there in the beginning, but he's here now, and now is what matters. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, looked at Nathan. Mr. Brooks, do you understand that you're taking on full responsibility for this child? I do, Your Honor. That this isn't something you can undo when it gets difficult. I understand. Emma, the judge turned to her, do you understand what's happening? Emma nodded solemnly. Mr. Nate is going to be my real dad, with papers and everything. And you want this? More than ice cream, Emma said, then thought. More than 2 ice creams. The judge smiled. Well, that's wanting a lot. She signed the papers with flourish. Congratulations, Mr. Brooks. You're officially a father. Emma jumped from her chair and launched herself into his arms. Can I call you Dad now? The word hit him like sunlight, warm and blinding. If you want to. Dad, she tested, then smiled. Dad, Dad, each repetition louder, more joyful. That night, Margaret's house was full. Dorothy from the bookstore, Emma's teachers, neighbors who had watched this improvised family form. Emma wore a special dress and a plastic tiara, presiding over the festivities like royalty. Nathan was on the porch, needing air, when Margaret joined him. "Sarah would be proud," she said simply. "You think so?" "I know." She handed him one last letter, still sealed. This one was to be opened today. With trembling fingers, he opened it. "Nate, if you're reading this, then you did the impossible. You came back. You stayed. You became the father I always knew you could be. I'm not there to see it, but I know. I know because I know you, even after all this time. I know that when you finally wake up to what matters, you give everything. Take care of our girl. Let her be wild and wonderful. Teach her about stars and math and all those practical things you love. But also, let her teach you about magic and imagination and the beauty of being perfectly, gloriously imperfect. I forgive you, Nate. I forgave you long ago. Now forgive yourself. With love, always with love. Sarah." "Dad!" Emma called from the door. "Come on, there's cake." He folded the letter, tucked it in his pocket near his heart. He took Emma's hand and let her pull him back to the light, to the noise, to life. A year later, as spring spilled cherry blossoms all over Seattle, Nathan was pushing Emma on the swing at the park when she asked the question he'd feared and anticipated. "Dad, will I have a mom someday?" He caught the swing's chains, stopping its motion. "I don't know, sweetheart. Would you like that?" Emma considered, head tilted. "Maybe, if she was nice, and liked dragons, and didn't make me eat broccoli." Pretty specific standards. "I'm a specific girl." He laughed, started pushing her again, but the question stayed with him. It was Claire, surprisingly, who changed everything. She'd moved to Seattle to continue working with him remotely, running the foundation he'd established in Sarah's name. And somewhere between meetings about donations and discussions about scholarships, he realized she understood Emma in a way that surprised him. "She needs structure but also chaos," Claire said one day, watching Emma build a fort from boxes in their new house. "Enough rules to feel safe. Enough freedom to discover who she is." "You seem to know a lot about children," Nathan observed. Claire blushed slightly. "I was Emma once. Single dad, grandparents helping, trying to figure out where I fit." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emma declare war on invisible enemies. "Claire," Nathan began, then stopped. "How do you ask your assistant of a decade if she'd like to have dinner? How do you do that as a single father with baggage the size of Seattle?" "Yes," she said. "I haven't asked anything yet. You were going to ask if I'd like to have dinner with you and Emma, not as your assistant." He looked at her, really looked. Claire Martinez, 38, brilliant, kind, who had managed his life with impeccable efficiency while quietly building her own alongside. "Yes," he said. "That's what I was going to ask." She smiled. "Then yes, but Emma chooses the restaurant. Prepare yourself for chicken nuggets. My favorite." Dinner was a success. Emma approved of Claire immediately when she revealed that she also believed unicorns were just shy horses and that green vegetables were a conspiracy. 6 months later, Claire moved into the house. Not all at once. First, just weekends, then a few nights a week. Then suddenly her toothpaste was in the bathroom and her books were on the shelves. "Is this weird?" Nathan asked one night. Claire curled against him on the couch, Emma asleep between them after movie night. "All families are weird," Claire said. "Weird is just another word for unique." The proposal came on an ordinary Tuesday. No fireworks, no grand gesture. Just Nathan in the kitchen making misshapen pancakes, Claire reading emails, Emma coloring. "We should get married," he said, flipping a pancake. Claire looked up. "Is that a proposal?" "Dad is terrible at romance," Emma informed them, not looking up from her drawing. "But he's good at math. An essential skill in a husband," Claire agreed solemnly. Nathan turned, spatula in hand. "I'm serious. I love you. Emma loves you. You love us, I hope. Let's make it official." Claire stood, walked to him. "Nathan Brooks, that's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "Is it?" "Yes." She kissed him. "And yes, I'll marry you." Emma clapped. "Can I wear a purple dress to the wedding?" "You can wear whatever you want," Claire said. "Even a dragon costume. Especially a dragon costume." The wedding was small, in Margaret's garden. Emma did indeed wear dragon wings with her purple dress. Nathan cried when Claire walked down the aisle. Claire cried when Emma read a poem she'd written about families being like gardens. Sometimes you plant, sometimes it grows wild, but love makes everything bloom. Margaret, officiating with an online license obtained for the occasion, said, "Families aren't made of perfection. They're made of choices, choosing to stay, choosing to try, choosing to love, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." 2 years later, when Claire gave birth to a boy they named Samuel, middle name Mitchell for Sarah, Emma declared herself official protector. "He's very small," she informed Nathan solemnly. "Someone has to make sure the world is gentle with him." "And you're going to do that? Me and you and Mom and Grandma?" she said. "We're a team." Nathan pulled her close, this girl who had taught him to stay. "Yes," he agreed, "we are." On a Sunday morning 5 years after that first meeting, Nathan woke to the sound of laughter. Claire was making coffee, Samuel running through the house in superhero pajamas, Emma, now 12 and all pre-teen attitude, reading by the window. Margaret was visiting, slower now but still fierce, helping Emma with a family history project. "Tell me about my mom again," Emma was saying. "Your mother," Margaret began, "was the bravest person I knew. She loved you with every fiber of her being." "And my dad?" Emma looked at Nathan across the room. "Your father," Margaret said, meeting his eyes, "had to learn to be brave, but he learned for you." Nathan moved to sit with them, looking at the old photos Margaret had brought. Sarah smiling, Sarah pregnant, Sarah holding baby Emma. "I miss her," Emma said quietly. "I do too," Nathan said. "Every day." "But it's okay," Emma asked, "for us to be happy anyway." Nathan pulled her close. "It's exactly what she would want, for us to be happy. To be family. To be us." Claire joined them, Samuel climbing into her lap. Margaret smiled, that rare smile that transformed her face. Outside, Seattle did what Seattle did. Light drizzle turning the world watercolor. Inside, a family that shouldn't work but did snuggled together, connected not by perfection, but by choice. Nathan's phone buzzed. Some work crisis, no doubt. He silenced it without looking. Some things never changed, but most of the important things had. "Dad?" Emma said. "Yes? Thank you for staying." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo she still used. "Thank you for teaching me how." If this story touched your heart, leave your like and share in the comments what moved you most. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our inspiring stories. And remember, it's never too late to choose love, choose family, choose to stay. Sometimes the best stories are the ones we write with second chances.